Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Thursday, January 9th, 2025. My name is Emma Vigeland, in for Sam Seder, and this is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Sandeep Vaheesan, author of Democracy in Power, A History of Electrification in the United States. And later, Hayden Clarkin, transit advocate, known as the Transit Guy, will be with us to talk about New York City's implementation of congestion pricing. Also on the program today, stay safe, California folks. At least 5 have died, thousands fleeing, and millions without power as multiple wildfires rage across Los Angeles. President Jimmy Carter is being laid to rest today in the Capitol Rotunda. 9 Democratic senators agree to advance the anti-immigrant Laken-Riley Act, opening it up for debate. NBC News reports that Trump is considering a high-profile roundup of undocumented immigrants in the D.C. area as a show of force right after the inauguration. Or maybe not right after, but in the days after. Alito spoke with Trump on Tuesday. Yes, the Supreme Court justice. Right after Trump's lawyers asked that very court to delay his sentencing. Shouldn't that not be allowed? Ugh. Trump's inaugural committee has raised so much money from corporate donors bending the knee that they don't even know what to do with it. A record $170 million donated. The ex-FBI informant who was the Republicans' key witness in the Hunter Biden Burisma bribe probe has been sentenced to 6 years in prison. Biden tells USA Today that he is not sure if he could have served 4 more years as president. Which begs the question, why'd you run? He's still convinced he could have beaten Trump, though. Delusional.
And nobody else is.
Not even his own pollsters, who had Trump winning 400 electoral votes.
Like, that could conceivably have been a huge, problem, but it's really difficult for even his most loyal people to be definitive about that.
Yesterday, tens of thousands of dock workers reached a tentative agreement on a new 6-year contract. Amazon workers in North Carolina will hold a union election in February. The Ski Patrol Union appears to have reached a tentative agreement with Park City Mountains. And lastly, Obamacare hits record enrollment ahead of a Trump administration that will likely try to gut it. All this and more on today's Majority Report, or should I say, a Majority Report. I mean, those hats, they were limited edition, but this is my brand now. Don't we have to brand ourselves?
Are they still available?
They are not still available. I think they're sold out, but I don't know why. We should do more of these. I think they're not still available, Bradley. I think they're sold out.
All right, that's good.
Anyway, hello, Bradley. Hello, Matt. Hello to all of you. And if you are in LA or...
It looks like they actually are back in the shop as of Monday. So check that out, unless they have sold out again, but I will double check.
Shop.majorityreportradio.com. Help me out with the coup attempt, folks. We need soldiers on the ground, all wearing matching hats. Not MAGA ones,
Yep,
though.
you can add to your cart on Shop.Majority Report Radio the limited edition and Majority baseball hats. So.
Very nice. Last Thursday we were back and Sam was here, so this is the first show I've been able to host in a minute. And what do you know? The world is on fire. It really is apocalyptic. It feels like we are at a point in our society where there's a genocide happening in Gaza and people are using that brutality for their own ends, these sociopaths that run our government. And then in Los Angeles, the world is on fire. And it's a bunch of wealthy oligarchs who and money, interests, imperial interests, what have you, weapons manufacturers. These are the people that are destroying our society. And it's a big reason why I think there's a lot of nihilism and people feeling dispirited right now. And the images out of LA here, let's just play this. This is an overhead shot from KTLA 5 News in Los Angeles, aerial footage of the Palisades area in Los Angeles after the smoke has cleared out, and you can just see how much damage the wildfires have inflicted.
Mike, I can't believe my eyes what we're seeing here in the Pacific Palisades and into Santa Monica. Just nothing but destruction. All those hot spots are structures that have burned or are burning right now. As I zoom in, it's just home after home. I don't even have the words for it to describe. Look at this area here. This is off of, it's off of Rimmer Avenue and Monument Street. I mean, just homes are destroyed here, just wiped out completely. It's just really unbelievable to see the devastation here, the structures that are still on fire, the businesses that have burned, the homes that have burned down, apartment complexes, fire next to that church there. It looks like a church anyways, but it's just unbelievable to see all this. I'm going to bring in our map system so you can see the streets that are affected here, but it is burned all the way to the shoreline, all the way down to PCH, and there you see the shoreline there, but it is just our first time looking at this. The smoke is cleared, and we're getting our first look from above at all the devastation here throughout the Pacific Palisades.
That's a helpful visual, and you can see from the air there, this was also some footage in the Palisades that was circulating inside a home in Los Angeles. You can see what it looks like when the flames are literally engulfing your home. This was shot by a resident, and I think they're okay. But here's some footage. You can see, for the podcast audience, what this looks like. I mean, it looks like an inferno.
I don't know how this house is still just sitting there.
Hopefully some fireproof materials.
You okay? You gonna be okay? Hi? You gonna be okay?
So that's what that looks like.
Yeah.
And we're going to be talking about greening our public utilities in just a second with our guests. But now, as I mentioned, 5 people have died. Nearly 200,000 people are under evacuation orders. Tens of thousands of acres have been burned. There are now 5 fires that have cropped up. It got worse last night. The water supply has also been really scarce because of the existing conditions. I mean, there's inequality issues and hoarding by the wealthy, but like LA hasn't logged more than 1/10 of an inch of rain since May of 2024. This is a climate issue. And now many residents are under a boil order notice because there's ash in the water supply.
Also, the air's not really safe to breathe.
Right. And to make matters worse, State Farm, which is one of the biggest insurers in California, canceled like hundreds of home policies. I saw 1,600 was a figure that is estimated right now in the Pacific Palisades. Can we put up that thread or that explanation here by Basil? Go to the first tweet, if you don't mind. So State Farm is trying to claim like, oh, it was the burdensome regulations that pushed us out and caused us to cancel all these home insurance policies. What else could we do? It's California being liberal and authoritarian or whatever. But here's the real explanation from Basil Mershabash. Do not under any circumstance buy this corporate propaganda from dominant home insurance carriers like State Farm. California law allows insurers to make reasonable profits on the risks they take. If state regulators rejected the premium level proposed by State Farm, it was probably because the proposed premium would have allowed State Farm to reap unreasonable profits. In other words, to gouge homeowners desperate for home insurance. State Farm almost certainly left California because it could, not because it was forced by premium caps. The fundamental problem in the home insurance market is that consolidation has largely eliminated competition among carriers. In absence of competition, the remaining home insurance carriers can make monopolistic profits in low-risk, low-cost regions of the country and in states that let them charge whatever premiums they want. As a result, they have little incentive to serve high-risk, high-cost markets, especially in states that do not permit them to charge unjustifiably high premiums. And they're going to claim that, we needed to charge these premiums because of the risk. If you could go to that third tweet in the thread here, Bradley, you can just see that California has granted State Farm premium increases previously over the past few years. This is, as he mentions, a problem of consolidation, of these insurance companies being able to gouge people whatever they want. And then, of course, the overall structure of the fact that this is not going to get better. How are we going to protect people and their homes?
And profit at the same time.
I mean,
that's the thing is, like, to the extent that these become monopolies, competition is one route for it. Maybe antitrust is a way to do this. Or we have a public insurance against climate crisis.
Yep.
And everybody gets covered, whether you're in the Appalachians when it gets flooded or whether you're in the Palisades. We all have to be in this together. And all this stuff, acrimony about private insurance companies. Well, guess what? We don't need to have you. And it's always funny because it's like they always say, we just want to do our insurance business. No, you want to get profits.
Right.
Like, let's be real. And that's never actually put forward because it's shameful. And most people don't actually think it should be involved in something like either healthcare or, houses getting burnt up because we can't protect the environment anymore.
It's without that option, and without, at the very least, heavy regulation and imposing penalties on these private insurance companies, at least in the short term, to force them to cover folks in these areas, we are going to see millions of people lose their life's savings potentially because we're encouraged to put all of our eggs in the home ownership basket over the next few decades due to climate-related disasters. I mean, that's the reality that we're looking at right now. And this is a part of what we've been talking about, which is like what needs to be central to any leftist vision of the world, which is decommodifying these essentials so that people are not decimated when the socialized losses that oil and gas and capitalists have imposed on us take out everything they've ever owned. I mean, these are communities that are gone. And if you're like, wagging your finger at the liberal coastal elites in this current moment, and because some of these areas are wealthy, you are really missing the forest through the trees here. No pun intended about this horrible wildfire. If it's not Malibu, it's going to be areas in Florida. And like the Hollywood Hills fire, what was freaking people out so much about that was that had the potential, and I'm not sure about the updated information, to go into an extremely densely populated area around Hollywood, which is more low income. So some of the reactions that I've been seeing have been silly, but we should all be in this together. And frankly, these oil and gas companies should be nationalized and then broken apart because they don't have any incentive to stop. They're trying to make money.
All these people have incentives, also including the AI industry, which is using a massive amount of electricity and making climate change worse. They all have an incentive to point the finger in the wrong directions, which is something that, we'll talk about later in the show.
with that said, here is a word from some of our favorite sponsors. This show is sponsored by Liquid IV. We are daily users of Liquid IV. This is the best way to get your hydration without any of the gunk that comes in those other drinks. Liquid IV is powered by Live Hydroscience. Helps you break the mold with flavors like their new hydration multiplier sugar-free raspberry lemonade, a bright zero sugar flavor combining notes of ripe, freshly picked raspberries and citrusy, zesty lemon. I am stocked with a Liquid IV. It is the best if you're feeling a little bit under the weather, if you're traveling. I'm thinking about handing these out maybe in the aftermath of my wedding, potentially, if people need to rehydrate in the morning. Could be a little bit of a nice party favor. It is really good, and the flavors are really good. You can get acai berry, lemon lime, pina colada in their multiple hydration multiplier flavors. You can also choose from their line of sugar-free flavors like raspberry lemonade, white peach, rainbow sherbet. Break the mold and your own ritual. Just 1 stick and 16 ounces of water hydrates better than water alone. It is powered by Live Hydroscience, an optimized ratio of electrolytes, essential vitamins, and clinically tested nutrients that turn ordinary water into extraordinary hydration. 3 times the electrolytes of the leading sports drink with essential vitamins, 8 of them, and nutrients, always non-GMO, vegan, gluten-free, dairy-free, and soy-free. Embrace your ritual with extraordinary hydration from Liquid IV. Get 20% off your first order of Liquid IV when you go to liquidiv.com and use code MajorityRep at checkout. That's 20% off your first order when you shop Better Hydration today using promo code MajorityRep at liquidiv.com. And lastly, ever wonder how much of your personal data is out there on the internet for anyone to see? More than you think. Your name, contact information, social security number, and home address, even information about your family members, they're all being compiled by data brokers and sold online. Data brokers make profit off your data. Your data is a commodity. Anyone on the web can buy your private details. This leads to identity theft, phishing attempts, harassment, and unwanted spam calls. But now you can protect your privacy with Delete Me. I started using Delete Me when really I started here because Sam recommended it to me, and this was before they were a sponsor. I'm on the internet. I'm a somewhat public person. This helps protect my privacy, my loved ones, stuff I don't want out there. And so Delete Me has worked really well for me so far. And I don't even really have to think too much about it. When I get an email from them, it shows me what information they have deleted, and that's really helpful and good for peace of mind. But it's also just like, if I don't check, I kind of trust that they're doing their job because they have been for all these years. We want to thank our sponsor for today's episode, Delete Me. I'm hyper aware of my safety and security, as I mentioned, and so I'd encourage, if you are in a similar situation or if you just want your personal information not out there for everybody, you can sign up and provide Delete Me with exactly what information you want deleted, and their experts take it from there. Delete Me sends you regular personalized privacy reports showing what info they've found, where they found it, and what they removed. Delete Me is not just a one-time service. It's always working for you, constantly monitoring and removing the personal information you don't want on the internet. To put it simply, Delete Me does all the hard work of wiping your and your family's personal information from data broker websites. Take control of your data and keep your private life private by signing up for Delete Me. Now, a special discount for our listeners. Today, get 20% off your Delete Me plan by texting MAJORITY to 64,000. Text MAJORITY to 64,000. That's MAJORITY to 64000. Message and data rates may apply. See terms for details. All right, folks, quick break. And when we come back, we will be speaking to Sandeep Vaheesan about his book, Democracy in Power. We are back, and we are joined now by Sandeep Vaheesan, legal director at the Open Markets Institute, working on anti-monopoly and antitrust issues, author of Democracy in Power, A History of Electrification in the United States. Sandeep, thanks for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
So obviously, I felt like we have to start here. We opened the show talking about the devastation of the Los Angeles fires. But if you could just, as somebody who in this book researched our public utilities and their history and how we can move forward in decarbonizing our utilities, what was your reaction to what we're seeing out of California right now?
It's horrifying, of course. We're seeing wildfires threaten the nation's second largest city, burning down thousands of acres. And it just underscores that the climate crisis is real, it's not theoretical, and that we need to take aggressive action to stem further harm. And, we've made progress. There's certainly more renewable energy on the grid than ever, but we still rely heavily on fossil fuels. More than 60% of our electricity comes from either coal or natural gas. So what we've done so far is not enough. And we really need to step up our game, and simply continuing down this present trajectory means we're going to see more incidents like the scenes we're seeing out of Los Angeles.
Right, and the progress that you mention, a lot of it is more kind of like technocratic. There were a lot of good things that the Biden administration did in terms of their efforts to make sure move the ball forward in terms of changing our energy system to be a little bit greener. But right. What your book really does focus on is the idea of a public ownership vision. Can you contrast that vision with the more technocratic vision, and like where those gaps are between even what the Democrats propose and want on a federal level, and what would probably make us most resilient and transition us more quickly?
Yeah, so at the outset, I should state that about 1 in 4 power customers in the United States gets their electricity from a publicly owned or cooperative utility. So I mentioned that fact because people might say, well, public ownership is utopian, it's foreign, it's not something we do with the United States, but we're already doing it on a very large scale. And right now, the present approach among the Democratic Party, probably best exemplified in the Inflation Reduction Act, is we should throw subsidies at the private sector, principally in the form of tax credits, and encourage them to invest more in renewable and other forms of clean energy. And that's what we've been doing for a long time. And my book says, well, if we're going to spend all this money, we should have more control over how it's spent. Instead of throwing carrots at the private sector, why don't we directly invest ourselves in clean energy and upgrades to the grid? And that's something that was done on a very large scale by President Franklin D. Roosevelt during the New Deal. The New Dealers spent a lot of money and invested directly to bring, among other things, light and power to the countryside. I think the basic thesis of my book is we already have this model. It's not perfect, but why don't we expand and perfect that and use the public sector to lead the fight against climate change instead of relying on these subsidies, which in some cases, we've made some progress, as I said, but I do fear that the end result could be we have more billionaires in this country rather than a clean energy grid.
Right. And the subsidies also in terms of long-term growth, part of the problem is that oil and gas, you can keep drilling for it, and the price of a gallon it's going to fluctuate, obviously, but it's a tangible resource, fuel that you need to refill up your gas tank. You need to reuse more of this tangible resource that can be you can charge it by the gallon, et cetera, as opposed to solar panels where the profit margins for companies that may be installing them, these for-profit companies, without government subsidy, they're less incentivized to go into that business just because they can't make as much money as they could with other energy sources. So like there's that incompatibility when we begin the conversation, in addition to all of the other reasons that you described.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So the private sector is going to invest based on profit considerations. So if fossil fuels continue to be profitable, they'll plow more money into oil and gas exploration and production. If renewables are more profitable, they'll go there. But it's very risky, in my view, to rely solely on the profit motive and say, well, we're throwing more subsidies at green energy. Let's hope 5 years down the road we have more wind and solar. I think it's very risky. I think it's very fraught. Why don't we invest directly, not abandon the profit motive, but maybe make it secondary and recognize the climate crisis is urgent. We need to invest regardless of whether it's profitable for Wall Street. And I think you're right. So if we rely purely on the profit motive and more subsidies, we're not going to get the investment we need to decarbonize. Certainly not on the time frame we need.
And there's a really fascinating, historical parallel that you explore in your book where about the expansion of electric power at the beginning of the 20th century. So can you start there? How the electrification process began really in the first 3 decades, setting up how FDR addressed it in a very different manner.
Right. So the power sector was dominated by private power companies for the first 4 or 5 decades, and they extended service based on profit considerations. And they viewed cities as profitable to serve. Lots of people are living in a relatively small area. If you build a mile of line, you might serve 300 or 400 customers. People are ready to use power on a large scale. By contrast, they looked at the countryside and said, population density is very low. We're going to build a mile of line and serve maybe 2 or 3 farms. And these farmers, we think of them as culturally, economically backward. They're not actually going to use all that much electricity. So through the 1920s, you saw the private power sector focusing heavily on cities, especially large industrial customers using a lot of electricity and neglecting the countryside. So in 1930, only about 1 in 10 farmers had electricity. And this was a time when the United States was much more rural. Today, about 85% of people live in cities. Back then, it was almost 50-50. So you had tens of millions of people in the countryside without electricity. And the private sector is basically writing off all these people, saying they're not profitable to serve. We'll get to it when the economic logic makes sense. And so Roosevelt comes in and says, what we're going to do is recognize first that electricity is a necessity. It's no longer a luxury. And that the only way to actually extend power lines into the countryside is by directly investing. And so what the New Deal did was the New Dealers created an agency called the Rural Electrification Administration that extended low-cost credit to rural electric cooperatives, which are community-owned institutions. And they built power lines into the countryside on a not-for-profit basis. And it was an extraordinarily successful program. So as I mentioned, in the 30s, about 1 in 10 farmers had electricity. 20 years later, that number was more than 9 in 10. So it utterly transformed life in the countryside. The practical benefits of electricity are you no longer rely on candles and kerosene lamps. You no longer have to do your laundry by hand. You have indoor plumbing. You have washing machines. Life became radically different and better in the countryside. So it wasn't just a matter of spending. It was a matter of spending to make people's living standards significantly higher.
And the what I was very unaware of was the corporate propaganda that was being deployed, and it was so eerily reminiscent of what oil and gas does today. But basically to downplay the idea of making this more publicly owned and expanding in ways that would not be profitable for them, but were obviously immensely beneficial for society, as you just say. That huge shift in just 2 decades in terms of electrification. What were some of the tactics that these private companies used to stave off public control?
They really pulled out all the stops to suppress the growth of public and cooperative ownership. So among the interesting things they did was they would actually review elementary school, high school, college textbooks and rewrite them. They would say, well, this presents public ownership in an unduly sympathetic light. It's too critical of private ownership. We're going to pull these textbooks and supply more industry-friendly textbooks. And, they had a lot of money to donate. They supported institutions of higher education. So they had a lot of leverage. So they effectively rewrote curricula to present themselves in a favorable light. So that was one thing they did. They trained people, including their own staff, to go out and give speeches touting the virtues of private power, saying public power is socialistic, it's Bolshevism. This was just a few years after the Russian Revolution, so they engaged in classic red baiting. And then another thing they did was they basically produced stories and editorial commentary and gave them to newspapers for free and said, hey, run this content and we'll buy a lot of ads in your paper. So it really was a systematic campaign to prop up private power and say that any alternatives are suspect and bad.
And how did FDR garner the political capital and will to take that on?
So the crash of 29 and the Great Depression really opened up new political possibilities. In a sense, laissez-faire capitalism was discredited. Millions of people were thrown out of work. And so there was a desire for alternatives. And I think FDR was smart and recognized, okay, here's an opening. Events don't automatically translate into different political economies, but he recognized, okay, the corporate barons stand tainted in the eyes of the public. Let me use this as an opportunity to present alternatives, more democratic alternatives. And one thing that he did extraordinarily well was he recognized as the president that he not only made policy and fought for good policy, but that he was, in a sense, the nation's lead political educator. So while private power fought all the things he tried to do, whether it was set up the Tennessee Valley Authority or support rural electrification, he used his bully pulpit to say, we actually can do things differently. We can invest directly. We can make life better for everyone. And that's something we don't really expect from presidents and politicians today, but it was really instrumental in winning many of these fights. And these fights are very, very challenging. It's easy to overstate how easy some of these fights were, but they were extraordinarily hard. And figures like Joe Manchin are hardly new.
Right. Well, I mean, in terms of using the bully pulpit, Donald Trump does that. Donald Trump does that a lot. I wish the Democrats would, but we also had a president who seemed kind of incapable of literally using the bully pulpit in any real way to sell this kind of thing. And it still is the technocratic stuff that you described, like tax credits. This is for people making over $100,000 a year, right? And then also, again, for this investment class. And there is this notion that private ownership of these things fosters innovation, right? And that is a refrain that is deployed by both parties in this country.
Absolutely.
But the history that you're describing says the opposite, that it was the public ownership or like the incentive with these cooperatives, at least in terms of the expansion, that perhaps it wasn't innovation, but it did improve our society in a really rapid way. And that was public investment, not private.
Yeah, you're right. It's an article of faith today that the private sector is dynamic and innovative and the public sector is the exact opposite. And if you look at the New Deal, it was really the public sector that was leading. So here's a concrete example. I mentioned earlier that private power said that rural areas are too expensive to serve. And so one fact they often mentioned was building a mile of distribution line in the countryside would cost anywhere from $1,500 to $2,000. And staff at the Rural Electrification Administration looked into that and said, actually, it doesn't need to be that high. What if we standardized and simplified line designs, spread apart the poles, removed some of the extraneous flourishes on them? We could actually do this for a lot less. And so within a few years, the REA concluded that actually a mile of power line in the countryside could be built for as little as $450. So this is an example of the public sector innovating. And further, the public sector quickly determined that there is actually a lot of use for electricity in farms, in rural homes that the private sector had just neglected. They recognized, okay, there's tremendous opportunity to electrify farm operations and sell a lot of power to rural Americans. And so the public sector led, and eventually the private sector came around and realized, okay, we could actually make money building lines into rural America. And so they did, but they were very much the laggards in this effort.
And in terms of how after these gains were made, what happened to kind of I guess loosen public control of our power system in the, I guess, latter part of the 20th century?
Yeah, so there was an effort starting in the late 1970s to deregulate, or I think my preferred term is restructure a number of industries. People know about airline deregulation, banking deregulation, trucking deregulation, but there was a similar effort undertaken in the power sector. And what really happened was there was a weakening of public control over these private utilities. There was a view that public regulation was hopeless, that the regulators would be captured. They were always a step or two behind the regulated companies. And so starting in the 70s, Congress as well as state government said, let's just try to create markets for electricity. We've tried regulation for about 75 years now. Let's use markets to sell and distribute power. And so we've had this sort of strange system, and this hasn't happened nationwide. It's mainly in the Northeast, California, and parts of the Midwest, where we have electricity markets where electricity is sold every 10 minutes. Utilities serving customers say, well, we need 500 megawatts of power, and then generators say, okay, we will supply 500 megawatts of power for a certain price. And we've had markets, and these markets have frankly not been all that effective. We've seen a lot of turbulence. We had a major power crisis in California about 25 years ago, more recently in Texas in 2021. And the practical problem is the prices keep yo-yoing. At times they're way too high, people struggle to pay their power bills, and at other times, maybe surprising to some people, they're actually too low. Power prices are so low that these generators cannot actually make money on the plants that they own, which is a serious problem because they have debts to service. And that's really what happened in Texas in 2021. When Winter Storm Uri hit, it turned out that Texas didn't have enough margins to meet the spike in power demand. All the necessary plants had been retired over the past 15 years because they were no longer profitable.
Can you talk a little bit more about Texas's power grid, which has presented numerous problems in recent years? And specifically, if you could compare it to right now, New York, our state, has this public renewables effort that they're pushing. Very contrasting visions, and just like what this looks like practically in 2025.
Yeah, so Texas in many ways is an exemplar of the libertarian approach to power policy. So they've completely deregulated the market. Every resident of Texas has to choose a competitive supplier, figure out who's going to offer the best deal. There's been a lot of misconduct and fraud in that retail power market, probably not surprising. And then upstream at the generation level, they have these competitive markets that have produced insufficient reserves, as residents of the state found out in 2021. And one peculiarity of Texas that I should mention is the Texas grid is actually isolated from the other two grids in the United States. So they're, in a sense, cut off from the Western grid and the Eastern grid. So when there's a spike in demand in the state, they can't actually pull power from Louisiana. And the reason they did this was the power companies in Texas didn't want to be regulated by the federal government back in the 1930s. So very nice deal for them, but not so good for ordinary Texans. New York is a contrast in some ways. You're right. In 2023, the legislature gave the publicly owned New York Power Authority the power to build large-scale renewable energy. So in New York, we're seeing a real push to make the public sector the lead actor in decarbonizing the state's grid. And recently, the Power Authority proposed to build 3.5 gigawatts of clean energy over the next, I believe, 5 years. People are saying they should be doing a lot more, but there's an ongoing fight to make the public sector be the lead actor in cleaning up New York's power supply, which is very, very different from the Texas approach, which is we'll trust the private sector and hope that the profit motive leads them to do the right thing for us.
And in terms of more rural areas to states that perhaps are a little bit less populous, is that, in maybe in the middle of the country, southern states, is that where you see some of the worst abuses because there's probably less oversight?
Yeah, so many of the areas you're talking about are served by rural electric cooperatives, which were once very small d democratic institutions controlled by their communities, accountable to their communities. And what we've seen over the past 30 or 40 years is many of these entities have become extremely insulated from their public. They've become defined by self-perpetuating boards, board members that serve for 30, 40 years without ever facing electoral challenges. We've seen outright corruption. And many of these institutions that were once quite progressive have become very conservative in really every sense of the word. They've resisted climate change regulation. They've even challenged the basic science of climate change. But the one good thing is these cooperatives, no matter how dysfunctional they are still democratic on paper. And we've actually seen member revolts in several cooperatives in Texas and South Carolina, where people said, enough is enough. Our cooperative CEO shouldn't be paying himself $1 million a year. This is an institution that belongs to us. We want them to take climate change seriously. So even at the worst cooperatives, when things get bad enough, we have seen people rise up and say, we're going to retake these institutions and run it for our collective again.
Sandeep, Vaheesan, the book is called Democracy and Power, A History of Electrification in the United States. Thanks so much for doing our show today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah. All right, folks, quick break. And when we come back, we'll be speaking with Hayden Clarkin. We are back, and we are joined again by Hayden Clarkin, also known as the Transit Guy, all over social media, and that's the name of your Substack. So when did you launch that Substack? Congrats.
Thanks. So obviously Twitter became a hell site, and so I decided, what is the point of like putting in like this time to actually try and educate people on like transit when all it is just bots and like MAGA people or Elon bros. And so I decided maybe I should do something more long form. And I've been really enjoying it, actually. It's actually a really fun, I know it sounds very coastal elitist, but it's actually like a really fun place to actually like get into policy rather than like, we should have these things. And people are like, yeah, we should, but how do we do them? Right. Like, so it just kind of is able to like arm some of that a little bit better.
So if anybody is interested in transit policy, you should definitely check out that Substack. Hayden is a great place to start. And, you know, last time we spoke, I do think we talked about congestion pricing. I can't remember anything. Yeah. It has been implemented finally. Yes. Can you explain how it works, what it is, and I guess also some of the changes that were made in between, like the original intent of the bill, and then how Hochul tweaked it because there was outrage from suburbia, specifically New Jersey. Yeah.
Well, I'm sure, I don't know if you've covered it already, but you might have seen Obama getting a little bit of like a tap from George W. Bush at Carter's funeral. And I would like to tell everyone and all the Republicans in Nassau County who are really mad about congestion pricing that congestion pricing was actually something that was introduced under the Bush administration in 2007. So this was actually a market solution to congestion. Basically since the 50s, 60s, and 70s, especially under Ed Koch, the idea that like congestion was out of control in lower Manhattan was always something that's been a problem, especially when during the entire decade of the 70s, when New York City was found to be not in compliance with the Clean Air Act because the smog and congestion was really terrible. And so Ed Koch was like, great, we're going to ban cars from almost all of the bridge crossings. This was in 1979, and the Supreme Court said you can't do that on your own. And so we've had congestion forever. And then in 2007, under Bloomberg and in partnership with Bush's DOT at the time, under Ray LaHood, they decided, what if we actually start implementing a congestion pricing between the hours of 5 a.m. and 9 p.m. every day in order to kind of discourage people from driving down the densest part of North America, as well as the most transit-rich portion. And it just kind of went from Bloomberg to de Blasio, and then Andrew Cuomo was like, yeah, this is a great idea. I don't know if how long you've been in New York City for, if you've been in your whole life, but if you remember in 2017, the New York City subway was like in a crisis. Like we had a state of emergency under Cuomo of like getting the subways fixed. And in order to get all of like the hundreds of miles and 472 stations of deferred maintenance of the New York City subway after 5 decades of neglect, they decided, well, what if we actually charge people with this congestion pricing to get into Manhattan, and we'll use the money generated against borrowing a ridiculous sum of money. At the time, it's about $15 billion, so that we can fund our capital plan. And so that was the goal. And in 2019, the state budget was Cuomo actually slipped that into the budget. And so it was approved, and people didn't really hear a lot about it because I will give Cuomo credit. He kind of just like masterfully like snuck it in. And so it went through, and we were going to implement it in 2021, but the optics of that is really bad when New York City during 2021 was like empty under lockdown. Right. It didn't make sense. In fact, we probably should have charged people like to come to the city just to like, liven up the city a little bit. Yeah. And so they were like bad optics. And then it was compelled to actually happen in 2024 based on the law that within 5 years it needed to happen. And you have to make $1 billion. So it was going to be $15 to get into the city. And then you would get a rebate based on what tunnel you came into. So for like the Midtown Tunnel, I think it was like $6 at the time with the original proposal. So you'd be paying like $9 extra, and it's a one-time fee. Doesn't matter how many times you go in and out of Lower Manhattan all day. It's this one-time fee. And so right about 2 weeks before it was supposed to happen in June of last year, Kathy Hochul was like, we're not doing it anymore. Forget it. We're pausing it. It's a bad idea.
Really, it's from wealthy suburbanites who want the option to go and drive into the city is basically the group of people that were most pissed off about this. Right.
Yes. Yeah. So, there has been a lot of like hubbub on social media, especially on TikTok, of like, it's a tax on the working poor. 90% of the people who work lower than 60th Street take transit, 90%. So they were talking about 10%. And of that, I think it's mid 6 digits. I think it's like $150,000 to $180,000 is the average salary or income of someone who drives into the city. So we're not talking about
because the tolls are already crazy.
Yes.
You're already paying a toll to get in, which were raised, multiple times. And so this is just an added expense to people who could already afford to pay the tolls instead of taking transit.
That's correct. And you also get a rebate based on it. The only place you don't get a rebate is if you're coming in from Upper West Side or Upper East Side, because you're not getting tolled until you get to that point. So yeah, that was the plan. It was going to be $15 and was going to happen. And then she said no. And I think one thing that like killed her, obviously she has no political prowess, but like one of the things that killed her like logic was that she had said that like diners in New York City were going to go extinct because I guess people from New Jersey, the state known for 500 diners, people drive into the city to go to diners across the street from Grand Central.
No, they don't. Okay, I'm sorry. This is just as like little New Yorker stuff. I was born in New York and then grew up in suburbs of New Jersey, then moved here, right? I remember diners from when I was a kid in New York City. They're not here anymore because they've all been priced out by like really luxury housing or restaurants that have financial backing, rent. Like diners are more low cost options. They're all in New Jersey now. There used to be great New York City diners, but they don't exist anymore because they were, they can't afford it. Anyway, keep going.
Yeah, and then she just used like really bad examples. There's a cafe, I can't remember the name of it. It's literally right under the road bridge that like leads you into Grand Central. And she was like, oh, that diner, I talked to the owner there like 2 days before I canceled it. And he said it was a bad idea. And like, I'm like, I'm sorry, but Grand Central is literally the biggest train station on the planet. If he needs cars to like go to his thing, then we're really screwed. So anyway, it didn't happen. I came on here and I pontificated. You and I both kind of went back and forth of like, was this a call from Hakeem Jeffries? Was this a Chuck Schumer call? Was this a President Biden call? Who did it? Or and I think looking back on it, it was a Hakeem Jeffries call because Kathy Hochul is still. I mean, she let it happen. So she decided after the election that it was going to happen again on January 5th was when it was going to reboot. So this Sunday, and it was going to be $9 instead of the original $15. Now, if you talk to Paul Krugman, he believes it should be $80 based on the cost of traffic congestion in the city and what it costs for Manhattan as it relates to congestion. I think that might be a little extreme, but yeah, he wanted it to be even higher. So $9 seems pretty reasonable. But yeah, the political backlash has been great, and this was expected. Congestion taxes are not something that a lot of people support until they're implemented. This happened in Sweden, specifically Stockholm in 2003 when they did congestion pricing. It had 2/3 of the citizens had disapproved it, and now 2/3 of the people have voted to keep it. So it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, of course no one's going to be excited to pay extra taxes. Like, why would you be, right? Right. And I understand the political issues around that, and especially, the equity issues that people have, and I understand.
Right. But it's not... But it's also, as you say, like now we're seeing the reactions on social media from some people that have to work like in the city. I saw the New York Times did a ride along with a taxi driver who said, I was skeptical, but now I can get from point A to point B in a much quicker fashion. If you could just speak about the immediate effects of this congestion pricing and how it helps emergency response time. So like people aren't dying in an ambulance. And overall, traffic has reduced drastically just in the first few days of its implementation.
Yeah, completely drastically. So we've seen response times for emergency vehicles in 2024, almost 9 to 10 minutes for ambulances in Manhattan. And that is directly related to congestion. People will tell you it's bike lanes, and that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. But yeah, so we've seen pretty large gaps with respect to response times. And then conversely, we've also seen, I don't know if you remember Gridlock Sam Schwartz, who used to be the head of the New York City DOT in the 70s and 80s. He said that based on his tracking since the early 70s, that in 2024, traffic was the worst Manhattan had ever seen. And so this was the only way to kind of disincentivize people. And some of the pro-congestion advocates have said, pro-congestion pricing advocates had said, even if we burned that money, like even if we burned all the money we got, the actual health outcomes of letting people in Manhattan breathe better are actually worth it, less so the goal of, funding the MTA. And so, we don't have a lot of data yet, right? Because it just started on Sunday. So it is a little hard to be like, well, maybe it was quieter in January. It was snowing on Sunday. Like there are certain like statistical things, right? But since then, peak hour traffic, the commute times for all of the tunnels and bridges have gone down about a half of the time. So I think it was the Battery Park Tunnel usually sees about 16 minutes of time to get through the tunnel. It's about down to 7 or 8 minutes. And so it's definitely working. I don't know if you saw, there was a really funny TikTok of this guy who was like, in his very heavy New York accent, like, the MTA is taxing us like crazy. Let's see what it does. And it took him 3 minutes to get through Canal Street from one end to the other. And he goes, okay, I F with it.
Yeah.
So it is one of those things where people have to see it. And I mean, the results, at least anecdotally via TikTok videos, are stark. It's just one of those things of like the political fallout of people just still not wanting to pay. Everyone knew that congestion pricing would work. That was never the problem. It was more of like the political appetite for charging people, especially in like areas of like Staten Island, Eastern Queens, that rightly feel like transit is not good enough for them to just ditch their car, right? I think that's a fair thing. And I do think a lot of times advocates, especially transit advocates, we need to think that like people just don't drive cars because they hate transit. A lot of times it's like, I'm making a market decision every time I walk out of my house, what's easier to get to, right?
Right.
And if you're going from like Queens to Brooklyn, it's probably easier to drive, right? Like it is, because there's very few subway systems that way. If you're going to like Carnegie Hall, it probably is easier for you to take the train, right? Because there's no parking. So you're always thinking of these like market decisions. And I do think sometimes advocates, we fail to just be like, well, take the train. It's like, well, it's not, it doesn't work for everyone, right? And I think that's a chicken or the egg situation with, we need money to expand transit. And so that's kind of where we're at. And I don't feel too bad for people in Nassau County, to be honest with you.
Right. And the point is that like, this is not replicable in most 99% of the country, like in terms of geographic location, right? Like the New York City, as you say, this was why it was such a no-brainer, is because of in the affected area in Manhattan, where and this is a part of the income inequality of the city as well. There is endless. So all of the subway lines converge there. It makes it as easy as possible to go from almost any part of Manhattan except for like Stuyvesant Town or other areas that are poorer, and this is by design. You can use public transit incredibly easy, but in areas like Queens, right, there are fewer subway lines because those are poorer areas. You may have to use the bus. Buses are going to be to benefit from this congestion pricing as well. But like the point is that this tax is there to fund improvements in the subway rail lines. Something like a majority of our subway stops are not handicapped accessible, for example. Like this is the kind of, if you could just explain what this money is going to go towards and how it'll hopefully benefit people who may be forced to use a car and they can use public transportation in the coming years as well.
Yeah, well, I think like when it talks about like, people who would drive and never take transit, it doesn't matter how much money you charge them. I think the argument I would make is like, isn't $9 worth not seeing brake lights in front of you your entire commute, right? Like just the piece of not having to see brake lights in front of your thing should be a reason you A, support transit in general, and B, you pay the congestion price because it doesn't matter. Like I'm getting into the city much quicker than I would before. I think I want to stress this, and this is something that I think I've changed my worldview a little bit since the election, is we are in an age where, I mean, look at what the LA fire is, where people don't trust institutions. And this is a bipartisan thing, right? Like Democrats don't trust, I mean, like literally my health insurance doesn't cover my inhaler. I found that out this morning. I was really mad, right? Like I'm pissed at all the healthcare system in this country, and so are Republicans. And I'm annoyed that we haven't expanded subways, and Republicans are mad that like the transit is not, efficient enough. So I think there's like bipartisan issues with our institutions, and I do think the MTA and a lot of our New York City institutions, and really everywhere, our big city institutions have failed people. And so a lot of this is more about trust. Like $68.4 billion would build about 177 miles of subway system in Spain. And a lot of people aren't going to see, with $68 billion, are not going to see a massive market improvement in their own subway stop. I can't promise that. And I think that's a big problem, is like we need to reform a lot of these agencies while also funding them. And that is a hard
sell.
That's a hard sell, right? Because like Trump, rightly so, and I'm obviously not a Trump fan, but like Trump rightly so will be like, the MTA is taking too much money, like to do what they want to do. And I'm like, I agree, but also they should get the money because Republicans and Democrats aren't going to fix the actual issues to make the MTA run better.
That's right-wing politics, right? They
Correct.
defund our institutions, and then when they don't work, they use that for further for further defunding. The point is like that is that is why this is a good news, is because despite those political headwinds, despite the fact that this is about reinforcing an institution that people have a ton of problems with, it is still a win to improve that and not imposing austerity, which is usually what the solution that is floated by members of both parties.
Correct. And I think that's like where we're now at, is like, and I wrote this in my Substack, my first Substack article, is like Republicans and like these tech bros and whatnot, they're at the door, at the gates, and they're like trying to knock down all of our institutions. And Democrats, at least in this election, were like trying to hold the gates back to be like, no, don't touch, the DOE, or don't touch these things that we know are not working, but we don't want you to like destroy or abolish them. We want to reform them. And so I think that's kind of like this healthy tension we've had, where it's like people are like, well, I'm paying money for the MTA and I don't see any changes, and I've not seen any changes. You're just taking my money, right? And like, that's a fair argument. It's kind of one of those things like the MTA needs to gain the trust of people back by implementing reforms that come from the federal level and the state level and the local level to work more efficiently. And that's not something that I recognize. And so I think that's kind of this healthy back and forth that a lot of people with congestion pricing are having, is that even if you convince them, like, we have 25% of the New York City subway is ADA accessible. And the ADA law was passed under H.W. Bush in 1990. So that means that it's been 35 years where, like, all of these subway stops have not had elevators. And they are very hard to put in because you're putting them into stations that have been around since the 1920s. So you're, like, trying to, like, invasively put these elevator and escalators into very old pre-war subway stops, and so it's not cheap. And so with this money, we'll be seeing tons of signal upgrades. You'll see about 60, I believe it's 60 new subway stations will get escalators and elevators. 1,500. I don't know if anyone's who's in New York City has ridden the new subway trains, the new subway cars. We're trying to order 1,500 more of those. And then more regional rail upgrades with Metro North, and new cars at Metro North, and new cars at the Long Island Railroad. And for those who are annoyed from New Jersey, $100 million of those dollars are going to New Jersey for New Jersey Transit as part of the lawsuit, because New Jersey keeps suing New York over it.
Can you explain that? Can you explain?
I'd love
because
to.
they're trying. What New Jersey's doing, in contrast, is adding another lane to the freeways, because
they don't need to anymore now.
When I think about my home state, I just think I wish there were more freeways. I wish there were more highways in the Garden State, specifically in North Jersey. Yeah.
One more lane, bro.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what's his name? Phil Murphy is trying to expand the Garden State Turnpike through like Bayonne and Jersey City, against Jersey City's wishes. I'll have you know. To the tune of $10 billion to add another
Jersey
lane.
City has a beautiful rail system. Rail system. Yeah.
Wonderful mayor, Stephen Fulop. We need him for New Jersey. He won't probably win, unfortunately, due to the machine. But he is absolutely excellent on housing and transit and livable communities. So that's kind of the issue, is that New Jersey residents and New Jersey taxpayers are and leaders are rightly annoyed that they are going to be, extra tax, and that tax or that pricing would not help better their own transit system, which to me is their fault. And they're I don't understand how Phil Murphy can get on TV or wherever and say, the transit is not good enough into New York City for people to just get out of their cars. And I think that's an issue on your part and your own leadership. So if that's an issue, that should be something that you fix. And under Phil Murphy's leadership and under Josh Gottheimer's whatever
potential leadership.
Yeah, I mean, there's been about a 5% decrease in bus service and transit service since 2019 in the state, and they've let the state's transit system basically rot. There's also been 15% fare hikes as of last year, and this is my favorite part. They've also said that there will be 3% increases in fares going forward every year, just year over year. And so when Josh Gottheimer is talking about how driving a car from like wealthy parts of northern New Jersey, where he's like represents, and going into New York City is a tax on the working class, I guess my question to him would be, what is a tax on the working class? But a majority of your congressional district actually takes transit into the city, and every year, for the foreseeable future, they will have to pay 3% increase, which could be more than inflation for the foreseeable future. And that's not something that you bring up or talk about. So I think that's a massive issue. And I think it comes back to this argument that I've had forever, where like in America, we don't treat transit as an actual way of moving people from A to B. We think of it as a social welfare program. And because of that, it's just kind of like, oh, well, if you don't have a car, we'll have this bus for you that comes every hour. And we've like checked off the box versus like actually using transit to like move people from A to B.
Right. And then it's a part of our, hopefully our greener future as well, when we can on another day maybe explore that angle. But Hayden Clarkin, I always love our conversations, even
Thanks so much for having me.
It's a little self-serving just because this is where I grew up. But I do think, and this congestion pricing thing, you mentioned Stockholm, London, right? Also implemented it. This Milan, this is the kind of, I think globally, hopefully there's some more focus on congestion pricing as well. Really appreciate your time today. Check out the Transit Guide on social media, but specifically on Substack now that you've launched that. Thanks so much, Hayden.
Thank you. And thank you for having me. Have a good one.
Of course. Yeah, you too. We're going to wrap up here in just a second, but I did want to quickly play this because we were off when Jimmy Carter passed away, so we didn't have an opportunity to talk a little bit about him and his legacy, which is complicated, but he's being laid to rest today in the Capitol Rotunda, and Trump and Bush and Obama are there sitting together. It's a little disconcerting.
It's a big party and you're not invited.
Yeah, and look, Carter was a fascinating figure in the sense that he won in 1976. I was looking at his electoral map this morning because Jonathan Martin had an interesting piece in Politico about this, and he won Mississippi, he won Louisiana, he won Arkansas, South Carolina. It was an East-West divide, much more so. And it's just a good example of how the political realities can change fairly quickly. But
and also the LBJ thing where he said we're going to lose the South to civil rights. He was wrong. They lost it because they eventually abandoned class.
Right.
Actually.
And Carter was also LBJ was seen as more of a Washington creature, even though he was from Texas. But Carter was of the South, from the South, and spoke as the governor of Georgia. I think that that's why he was able to win in that wonky map a bit. And he was ahead of his time in a lot of ways. He famously put solar panels on the White House, which got ripped down. He did, right after getting elected, pardon Vietnam War evaders, which is a good thing in the post-Vietnam War era. But he also presided over deregulation and the ushering in of neoliberalism, replacing New Deal, more Keynesian or liberal thought with more neoliberal policies. He was
anti-union. You can find some pretty big quotes just saying, we need to cut them down to size, and you reap what you sow.
Right. And he was just kind of skeptical of big government intervention as the governor of Georgia. So that was a part of his ideology that we definitely don't agree with. He deregulated airlines, railroads, trucking companies, all of this resulted in worsening worker protections and, higher prices and monopolies, which we bear the brunt of. Does anyone like air travel? The way airlines can treat us as consumers can be directly drawn back to this start. And
on the positive side of the ledger, the super strike points out the Panama Canal. He followed through on getting rid of but giving up the Panama Canal despite a lot of right-wing BS about it.
Right. And what's interesting, I had forgotten that Nixon had implemented gas price controls.
Oh yeah.
Just another example.
Well, Nixon was pre-neoliberal. I mean,
right.
that's why Corey Robin.
But Carter got rid of them.
Yeah, Nixon was the last of the New Deal presidents, according to Corey Robin.
Right. And I know Milton Friedman thought he was basically a traitor, Richard Nixon, for some of those price controls that he implemented. And many of the pandemic supply chain issues we've seen, you can draw that back to Jimmy Carter's presidency because of the unleashing of globalization in our supply chains in that way. So. On the economics, that's not going to be something that we have agreement on. But Carter did at least attempt to negotiate peace with Israel-Palestine, and Camp David was a failure. But he did threaten to cut off aid to Israel during that process. And in his post-presidency, Carter really, I think, tried to atone as a Christian for the horrors of being the president of this empire, because you have to do unspeakable things, just kind of by default for the most part. And he did so much humanitarian work with Habitat for Humanity and other charitable organizations. So his post-presidency, it wasn't like what Obama did, doing documentaries with Netflix. He tried to really make a difference in our country. And I think he deserves praise for that. And I wanted to also play this clip because, as I mentioned, he was the Camp David negotiations were, of course, biased towards Israel. I mean, the United States is leading it, but it was a different dynamic than what we see today. And this is an old clip of him. He wrote a book on the apartheid that Israel has imposed on Palestinians. This is a former U.S. president. There are few politicians at all that will talk about Israel-Palestine in this way right now. Only a minority will. And this is how Carter was speaking about it in a clip with Amy Goodman on Democracy Now! In 2007.
And the word apartheid is exactly accurate. This is an area that's occupied by two powers. They're now completely separated. The Palestinians can't even ride on the same roads that the Israelis have created or built in Palestinian territory. The Israelis never see a Palestinian except they're Israeli soldiers. The Palestinians never see an Israeli except at a distance, except the Israeli soldiers. So within Palestinian territory, they're absolutely and totally separated, much worse than they were in South Africa, by the way. And the other thing is, the other definition of apartheid is one side dominates the other, and the Israelis completely dominate the life of the Palestinian people.
Why don't Americans know what you have seen?
Americans don't want to know, and many Israelis don't want to know what is going on inside Palestine. It's a terrible human rights persecution that far transcends what any outsider would imagine. And there are powerful political forces in America that prevents any objective analysis of the problem in the Holy Land. I think it's accurate to say that not a single member of Congress with whom I'm familiar would possibly speak out and call for Israel to withdraw to their legal boundaries or to publicize the plight of the Palestinians, or even to call publicly and repeatedly for good faith peace talks. There hadn't been a day of peace talks now in more than 7 years. So this is a taboo subject, and I would say that if any member of Congress did speak out, as I've just described, they would probably not be back into Congress the next term.
So there you have it. Rest in peace, Jimmy Carter. That just a fascinating, honestly, contrast. And him saying that in 2007 was exactly accurate. And so, as we've said, like even Reagan and Bush stood up way more to the Israeli government. Carter was threatened, as I said earlier, to cut off arms when in the midst of the Camp David negotiations to get Begin to listen to him more. He actually tried to use power, and those negotiations failed, and Sadat was assassinated, obviously. But still, just an interesting, I think, example of how AIPAC and the Israel lobby has completely dominated and taken over this discussion in our country.
It's the least an American president could do, but it's important in the sense that a lot of people act like this sort of thing is verboten to say. And that's why important, like Amnesty International, which is an organization who we didn't run ads for back like 8 years ago when they wanted to run ads on this program, because they were, I think, I remember talking with Michael, slow to criticize Israel on a lot of this stuff. But once they do, it's very useful because we have an entire media sort of class that's conditioned to not even be aware of that, to even like not know that, oh, Jimmy Carter actually did a book called what? Like, because like a lot of, and I keep going back to, I can't remember the guy's name, but Ben Rhodes, Obama guy, who said, like, when I have these press briefings with reporters, a lot of them are like 30-year-olds that don't know anything. They don't know about like Iran-Contra. They don't know any of this stuff. And it's just very useful because a lot of this stuff is operating on complete ignorance. Like it's people that don't have even that understanding, or they need a signal like from Jimmy Carter to say, okay, apartheid is something that I can say without subscribing to some sort of blood libel, which is what is thrown at people.
Exactly. So there you have it, folks. Jimmy Carter dead at 100, and his funeral procession in the Capitol is today. So with that said, we're going to wrap up the first hour of this program. The show relies on your support. Join themajorityreport.com. You can IM the program. You might get your IM read on air. It's likely that you may. Matt, what's happening on Left Reckoning?
Yeah, one final note. I think like all the joviality you see at Carter's funeral is because all the presidents that are still alive are tired of being shown as worse people.
Yeah.
By his continued existence.
I mean, yeah, right. That's his post-presidency makes like the way that Bush's paint. Well, Bush should be just completely excommunicated from society, but specifically, I think it draws a contrast to Biden or to Obama's post-presidency.
Yeah, exactly.
So what's happening on Left Reckoning?
Left Reckoning will have a reading series, reading for patreon.com/Left Reckoning. And we talked a lot of Canada with Ahmed Sheikh and Luke Savage. So if you are a Canadian listener, you will want to get on that post-haste.
All right. And on ESPN today, we'll be back. We will be previewing the playoffs. We will be
I was literally thinking that Herm Edwards.
I know. It's the kind of thing, like I saw someone was tweeting, what are the Trumpisms that have just become incorporated into your vocabulary? And it's like sad or that kind of thing. There's just certain like iconic moments that stick in your brain. But anyway, we'll be talking about the playoffs, giving our picks against the spread, youtube.com/ESPN show. Hello, my friends. I haven't seen you guys in so long.
Hello.
Hello.
Hey, how you doing? It has been a while, right?
It has
It's been a while.
Yeah.
That's another one. Because
Another
I don't know
one.
if people watch Comedy Bang Bang or listen to Comedy Bang Bang, the podcast. For about 2 years, Scott Aukerman and Paul F. Tompkins, anytime someone said it's been a while, they would sing, it's been a while.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I do that because of the Stained song, obviously.
No, that's why they do it too. I think that's why anyone does
perfect.
it. Yeah.
You're normal. Don't worry. What's happening on the discourse? You're streaming over there.
I am. I'm streaming up a storm. That didn't come out right. Well, yeah. So yesterday we did a little wildfire coverage, a little normal wildfire coverage. I think tomorrow we're going to dig into geoengineering. A a lot of people on the right and maybe also on the left have given into their tinfoil hat impulses and are arguing that these wildfires in California may be something other than normal. And so we'll probably dig into that. And I also want to go through this like ProPublica piece on vigilantes infiltrating white supremacist groups. So,
oh yeah, yesterday, as seen yesterday on Majority Report.
Oh, perfect! Wow.
All right, Matt, what's happening, Binder, on your shows?
Sure. I just got back from CES in Vegas this morning, which is why I sound like this. So
partied over there. Huh?
That's what I've been doing. I have not done my own show this week because I've been covering what's been going on in the tech world over at CES.
Very cool.
I have to ask you about graphics cards in the fun half, Binder.
Yeah, sure. Let's do it.
Yeah, we'll do that.
All right. We'll head into the fun half now. 646-257-3920. See you there.
Oh, sorry. 1 second. I clicked on the wrong thing.
Oh.
Here's the Emma Thursday.
Okay, Emma, please.
Well, I feel that my voice is sorely lacking on the Majority Report.
Wait. Look, Sam is unpopular.
I do deserve a vacation at Disney World. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to welcome Emma to the show.
It is Thursday.
I think you need to take over for Sam.
Yes, please. No. I'm gonna pause you right there. Wait, what? You can't encourage Emma to live like this. And I'll tell you why. So was offered a tour, sushi, and poker with the boys. Tour, sushi, and poker with the boys. Was offered a tour, sushi, and poker with the boys. What? Tour, sushi, and poker.
Tim's upset.
Tour, sushi, and poker with the boys. Was offered a tour, sushi, and that's what we call it in the biz. Tour, sushi, and poker with the boys.
Right.
Tour, sushi, and poker.
We're gonna get demonetized.
I just think that what you did to Tim Pool was mean.
Free speech.
That's not what we're about here. Look at how sad he's become now. You shouldn't even talk about it because I think you're responsible.
I probably am in a certain way, but let's get to the meltdown here.
Tour, sushi, and poker with the boys. Oh my God. Tour,
Wow.
sushi. I'm sorry, I'm losing my fucking mind. So was offered a tour, sushi, and poker with the boys.
Logic.
Tour, sushi, and poker with the boys. Boy. Tour. I think I'm like a little kid. I think I'm like a little kid. I think I'm like a kid. Tour. I think I'm like a little kid. I think I'm like a little kid. I had this debate 7,000 times. A little kid. I think I'm like a little kid. I think I'm like a kid. Tour. I'm losing my fucking mind.
Some people just don't understand.
So I'm not trying to be a dick right now, but like I absolutely think the U.S. should be providing me with a wife and kids.
That's not what we're talking about here. Okay, all right.
It's not a fun job. Tour?
That's a real thing. That's real thing. Real thing.
Willy Wonka tour?
That's a real thing. That's real thing. Real thing.
What's that offered a tour?
That's a real thing. That's real thing. Real thing. That's a real thing. That's real thing. Real thing.
That offered a tour? Ladies and gentlemen, Joe Rogan has done it again. That offered a tour?
That's a real thing. That's
poker with the boys.
I think he might be blowing it out of proportion. Real thing.
That's poker with the boys. That offered a tour?
That's a real thing. That's
poker.
Let's go, Joey.
Tour? Sushi and poker with the boys.
Take it easy, buddy.
Tour? Sushi and poker. Things have really gotten out of hand. Sushi and poker with the boys.
Delusional.
Tour?
Deluded.
Sushi. You don't have a clue as to what's going on. Live YouTube.
Sam has like the weight of the world on his shoulders. Sam doesn't want to do this show anymore. It was so much easier when the Majority Report was just you. You were happy.
Let's change the subject.
Right.
Rangers and Knicks doing great.
Now, shut up. You don't want people saying reckless things on your program.
That's one of the most difficult parts about this show.
This is a pro-killing podcast.
I'm thinking maybe it's time we bury the hatchet.
Left is best. Ultraviolet.
Tour?
Don't be foolish and don't fucking tweet at me and don't bitch. The way Emma has cucked all of these people, love it.
That's where my heart is, so I wrote my honors thesis about it.
Oh,
sorry,
she wrote an honest thesis. I guess I should hand the main mic to you now.
You are to the right of me on foreign policy.
We already fund Israel, dude. Are you against that?
That's a tougher question I have an answer to.
Incredible theme song.
Hi, Bumbler.
Emma Vigeland, absolutely one of my favorite people. Actually, not just in the game, like period.
And back.
Hello, folks. We are back. We are back. I'm going to open up the phone lines here. 646-257-3920. Eli from Jersey, thank God I don't have Matt's job because I would fake out the outro music all the time. As a troll, I guess. Greg from Arkansas, Matt, you made an amazing point on the ignorance of the right wing. I'd like to add that ignorance is essentially the linchpin for so many of the opinions, actions, and perspective of the right wing, condoning genocide, supporting economics that screw over the working class, etc.
I don't remember saying that, but cheers.
Maybe it was from yesterday or something. But Andrew from DC, I'm so glad I listened to the best ofs over your break. I got so much context for all the quotes that make up the M Majority Report theme song. Oh, did we include some of those clips in the best of clips? And maybe it's from some of our, funnier segments. Nicola, I think reading Reaganland goes in depth beautifully as to why Carter lost. Yes, that's a great book.
Yeah, also like a little bit of election interference going on there with the whole Iran stuff and Reagan.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So what? It was 79? Yeah. 79, the Iran? Yep. Revolution? Yeah. So right before. Yeah, that makes sense.
And like holding the hostages until crisis longer, yeah.
Dave from Upstate, Emma, just think of all the celebrities who have to go to a smaller second mansion owed the humanity if they make 6 figures or more. Well, yeah, right. The point is just like this. It's not just people who are
LA is not just
affected.
Celebrities.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I think that was sarcastic.
Oh, right, yeah.
Kowalski from Nebraska, we could see gridlock traffic across northern Texas from snow. There are threats of ice storms across the southeast of the Midwest, and the sizable chunk of the nation's second largest metropolitan area is on fire with no rain relief for a week. I love living in historic times. Jesus, yep. Brooklyn Sue, FDR's rural